So we're going to slowly get started. Hello, everybody. This is one of the final sessions at UIST. We still have a social hour afterwards. My name is Mike Enabling. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. I was also one of the program chairs at UIST this year. Not sure if you noticed. It's been a fun conference. So it is my pleasure now to open this closing plenary with a keynote from my keynote speaker. We have Dr. Melody Ivory here. Hello.
Hello. I am so excited to be here with you today. And let me get my screen up so we can get started. This has been, yes. Okay.
All right, so I'll do a quick introduction. So Dr. Melody Ivory is a poet and the first Black woman to earn a PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley, with a dissertation that explored the intersection of HCI and data science to elevate web design. She also holds an MBA from Wharton Business School and a BS in computer science and math with honors from Purdue University. Dr. Ivory has over 2 decades of experience in data science and ethics, software technology, and tech education across industries and organizations like GE and Microsoft. She's been a Google Innovation Facilitator and Product Manager for consumer electronics and software. She is an inaugural Bill and Melinda Gates Scholar and former University of Washington professor. She is currently the founder of Thrivify, a lifestyle technology and pending certified benefit company. At Thrivify, she is disrupting the status quo for the marginalized majority with smart solutions to enlighten and empower us all. Stop settling in life, at work, and with tech. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the stage. At UIST, we care a lot about novel technologies. Please get us also to think about these issues. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here today. And greetings to you wherever you are in the world right now. And thank you so much for joining this closing plenary to talk about more human HCI. And as was alluded to in the intro, I am really concerned about tech harmony and tech harm. And the intersection of that with HCI is what I want to explore today. And so I'm going to start by talking a lot about humans. Probably 2/3 of my talk is about humans. And then I want to come back and talk more about the HCI community, what it means for us, what we can do, and how to proceed. So let me begin here. Let me see. Get this to go. Seems for 1 second and make sure my slides. Are you seeing my slides okay?
Okay. I'm seeing your slides, and as soon as you feel comfortable, I will actually hide myself, but I'll be here with you.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, I'm good. And so I want to open this up with a question for us in the sense of, and it's a question that may seem like it's a loaded question, but I'd like for you to think about this question of, to what degree do you feel like you need a solution to support you in dealing with personal or professional harm you have actually experienced or you could potentially experience with tech products, companies, or the industry overall? And you can respond to this question using this 5-point scale, where 1 means not at all needed and 5 means extremely needed. And I'd also like for you to think about why or why not. And I will come back to this question. So in the meantime, just think about it. And as you form your thoughts, I'm not looking for a book. It can be just top of mind, what comes up for you. You can post it in the chat. You can post it in the Discord channel as well. And while you do that, let me tell you a little bit about my journey and how I got into HCI, and continue thinking about this question, if you will, and feel free to post if you feel comfortable. So in my journey, in my life, my life is divided into 2 parts: before tech and after tech. There's definitely a clear line in my life. I discovered tech in the 5th grade. I was fortunate enough to go to a gifted middle school. And in the 5th grade, I had my first computer class on a Commodore PET computer like the one you see here. And I was just fell in love with computers because I was able to program a game in BASIC. Nothing fancy like we see today in games, but the experience of being able to tell a computer what to do and have it actually do it was very empowering to me. And that was important because I hadn't felt empowered in my life up to that point, because before that point, my life was very chaotic. By the time I was 7, I was abandoned by both of my parents, and I found myself in the foster care system with strangers. And then ultimately, I became a foster child with my relatives, my grandparents. But as depicted and pointed out in this article is actually about me and my family and one of the worst cases of child abuse. And for me, falling in love with computers, feeling empowered by computers, set me on a path where I said, I'm going to follow this to the end of the earth. I don't know where it's going to go, but I love computers. I want to follow computers. And I'm not saying my life was better after that, but I had a purpose. I had a mission. I had inspiration such that no matter what I dealt with, I knew that I was going to be involved with computers. So fast forward to graduate school. I'm at UC Berkeley, and I'm spending all my time in this computer lab with computers, the very thing that I fell in love with so many, many years ago. And in this case, I'm in the computer lab with these mini computers, networks of workstations, they called it, which is now cloud computing. And I'm studying parallel computing and scientific computing, and I'm just dealing with machines all the time. And one day, I realized it's cold in here, and there's no people in here. Where's the people in computer science? And I looked around at all the disciplines, and the only discipline that actually dealt with people at the time was human-computer interaction. The other disciplines were about things, hardware, networks, algorithms, theories, but not people. And I was craving people at this point. And I was thinking about people like my grandmother, who was navigating the world in a wheelchair. I had a front row seat to watch her navigate the world, and the lack of accessibility, things we take for granted today, like even the cutouts on the street so that you could push yourself around and be mobile. That wasn't possible in my time with her. And I got a chance to see how that lack of accessibility really hurt her sense of self, made her feel like a second-class citizen, left her disempowered. And so as I was pondering this notion of the lack of people in my computer studies, I decided to switch to HCI, and I blended my passion of machines with my passion for people and wanting to make a difference through technology. And that's still very true for me today. And so I switched and graduated, and I've been in HCI ever since. So let me come back to this question, which is, to what degree do you need a solution to support you in dealing with personal or professional harm you have actually experienced, or you could potentially experience, with tech products, companies, or the industry overall? Why or why not? So I'm going to share, and it's actually painful for me to even have to ask this question. And I've asked this question to over 400 US-based web users. And it's really on their unaided recall of tech harm. I didn't explain to them what tech harm was. I left it up to them to see what they know, see what they feel, understand their perspective on tech harm. So there's one response that I see in the chat that I wanted to share before I move into the discussion. And this is from Jasmine, I believe. She rated this question as a 4, and she said she feels like solutions acknowledge that now harm occurs in professional settings, helps make spaces more accessible, welcoming, but also recognize many solutions, especially top-down solutions, don't solve a lot of social political tensions at play. That's a good point, Jasmine. And I suspect we will, as we share some of the other perspectives as well, I'm sure you'll see this perspective also playing out in the 400 web users that have participated in the survey. So let me explain what I mean by tech harm a little bit. When I was originally studying this, I did extensive research and surveying of the literature and watching videos, seeing what others were doing. And I ultimately compiled this alphabet of tech harm. And there's 63 different issues, threats, and outcomes that are amplified, caused, or somehow enabled by tech products, services, or organizations. And a lot of them came from the survey, but some of them actually came from the users themselves. For instance, people talked about the vulnerability of people, which was mentioned in that comment. They also talked about the vulnerability of their assets, their data, their identity as well. And these harms bubble up into 7 categories, from experiential, something as simple as, I am having a problem with my technology. I need to call someone. I can't get anyone on the phone, or I have to deal with a robot. Or it could go up to these societal issues, which is something that Yasmin talked about as well. Like there are some societal issues around algorithmic control and bias and lack of discrimination, homogeneity, diversity, things like that. So it ranges, and it's things that affect our physical body or affect us psychologically as well. So that's what I mean by tech harm. I want to share a framework that I use to think about it. Ultimately, from this research, I discovered that people really fall into 6 different archetypes. What distinguishes those archetypes a lot is these 3 dimensions: awareness of what they know, concern, how they feel about it, meaning it's not necessarily that they feel super negative or super positive, but do they feel like it matters to them in some way, that it impacts them in some way? And expertise, meaning the skills that we have to deal with those things. And as we look on these dimensions, there are 6 different levels of where people can be in each of these spaces. And people are not always at the same place on each dimension, but if you look at the median across the 3, they'll usually fall into one of these zones. And the zones vary. For instance, if you don't have a lot of awareness or a lot of concern, then what happens is you tend to be more complacent. You tend to not do anything about it, which means you don't necessarily develop the expertise. If you don't have the expertise, then you don't have the skills that you need to deal with tech harm when it arises. So all of these dimensions come into play, and it brings out 6 different archetypes, ranging from the sleeper to the generalist. And the idea is, as you increase your awareness and your concern, and you're actively taking action and increase your expertise, you actually move through these zones. You don't have to stay one archetype. As you learn more, do more, feel more, you can migrate through this. So keep in mind, this framework is not just applicable to tech harm. It's really like an empathy map. And I've found in several other domains, like in looking at productivity, looking at people's living their purpose, looking at accountability, that I could find these same 6 archetypes in other domains as well. So keep in mind how you might be able to map the users in your domain into their level of awareness, concern, and expertise to understand what they might need and who they are and how they interact in your domain. It's not meant to be a replacement for like an empathy map or other things, but it's certainly useful. One of the things I found in this study is there were gender differences. And I want to apologize, first of all, because in the survey, there was no non-binary option. So I mean females and males in the broadest sense of what that means to people. And there was no way to select that. But what we found is if you look at the percentage, the presence of awareness about one or more tech harm among females and males, it was slightly higher, but it was actually significant from a chi-square test. The same is true for the experience. And you see, women or females, and I shouldn't say women, I should say females, have a higher incidence. You know, you can see it's 7% higher incidence in that population of experience of tech harm than males. Now, the solution need didn't really change. That was not significant. And for solution need, anyone who rated that question as a 4 and above is considered someone having solution need. And that wasn't different between males and females. So let me talk a little bit about the archetypes in this particular domain, what I found about them. I've already outlined that gender differences played a role. The other thing that played a role was the type of device they used, the type of smartphone, whether they were privacy focused. Obviously, all the ACE characteristics, do they believe that tech harm is possible for them? What do they know about tech harm? Have they experienced tech harm? What do they do? Do they advocate for others? All of those factors were important. What was not important and surprising was social economics did not matter. Age did not matter either. It was really boiling down to these awareness, concern, expertise, but also the devices, the gender, and some key behaviors. So let me give you an example of the sleeper. These are Android users, males or females, who are tech fans. They tend to deny tech harm actually exists. If you ask them, you'll have high incidences of people saying it doesn't exist, or they might actually get offended if you mention tech harm. But they have little to no awareness or expertise to mitigate it, as evidenced in their narratives. And one interesting thing about them is half of them use privacy blocking on their devices, with their browser, in their search engines. So if they don't know much about tech harm, then why are they using privacy blocking? Well, this has to do with the fact that they're on an Android phone. They understand that there's some potential tracking going on as they're using an Android phone, but they don't necessarily consider the need to use privacy blocking as a form of tech harm. And that's really what it means to be a sleeper. You don't know what you don't know. The other key thing to point out is, as I mentioned, there was higher incidence of tech harm experience among females. So the budding pro and the specialist, these are the two archetypes where most of the tech harm came from. You'll see it in the narratives that they talked about it a lot. They had hands-on experience with tech harm. And they differ based on Android versus iPhone user. The difference between the budding pro is they're still in the learning phase. They may mistakenly think that they are an expert, but they have concern, they have gained some awareness, they have some expertise. But the specialist knows a lot about tech harm. They have very broad tech harm vocabulary, but they're probably a specialist in certain types of tech harm. They've probably experienced it once or more, or they had an experience that sits with them, that they know how to deal with that particular tech harm. And that distinguishes them from the generalist. The thing about the generalist, this is a very small population that I think are probably tech people like you and I. They may not have the widest vocabulary when it comes to tech harm and being able to recall it in an unaided way, but they feel and they have expertise that whatever comes up, they're prepared to deal with it. They know that tech harm is real. They're concerned about it. They tend to be advocates for others. They haven't actually experienced tech harm directly, but they have more than likely helped others with tech harm, because this is the only archetype that's an advocate for other people. So those are the archetypes. The biggest thing for us to keep in mind about these archetypes, and again, the archetypes, the domains can be different, but those 6 archetypes exist in just about every domain. And when we start probing on their awareness, concern, and expertise, we can find these archetypes. And all the archetypes need to care. And what that means is they need to be concerned, they need to be aware, they need to be responsive, to act quickly when things happen, and they need to be engaged and proactive. And so for us, how do we support their caring is something for us to think about as we start bringing more tech harm awareness into our HCI solutions and research. How can we move them so that they're progressing through these different archetypes so that they can have more tech harmony, honestly, is the best way I would say that. So I want to leave it up to you. Let me pause here for a minute and open this up with another question for you to respond to. And this should be an easier question, which is, if you think about those 6 archetypes, and I know I didn't go into a whole lot of detail with them, but if you think about them, what do you think is your archetype? And furthermore, how do you think it influences your tech solution research or effort? So please, I'm going to pause here, and I'd love to have a couple of responses in either the Zoom chat or the UIST Discord channel on what is your archetype and how does it influence you? Again, not looking for a book, just top of mind here.
I can see some people typing into Discord, so I think it's a good question. Thinking about who we are and who we're designing for, and I would potentially distinguish the two. Curious what our participants are going to enter in Discord.
Okay. Jasmine, practitioner, budding pro, in between. There's a lot I'm unfamiliar with, but I try to be safe against tech harm. Great, Jasmine. Thank you for that. You get the Star Participation Award.
Jasmine is great. I met her at the conference. I think she will appreciate it.
Any others?
We have one in the Zoom chat.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, it's budding pro. Okay. I do not know much and was never directly confronted with tech harm. To my knowledge, I believe this is influencing my way of doing research than it, but it's not sure how much yet. Okay, fair enough. And yeah, one interesting thing I have found is as I talk to other techie people, the common thing they say to me is, yeah, I know I should be doing more, but I'm just not. So they're aware, but that's what I said when it gets to that complacency, is if the concern is not there, then we're not likely to take action. So, okay, I will move forward now. Thank you so much. Please continue. I see another one here from, is it Kamala? A budding generalist. Yeah, okay. So it's kind of on the cusp. A practitioner from Roland. Celine says a specialist with respect to our research. So trying to design and teach older adults who have caregivers. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I know this is a little bit different than most plenaries, but I'm hoping to have a conversation more than anything, because some of these things are complex and need some conversation. Okay, so let me go into the next piece of this. And I see another budding pro. Very popular, very common, those two categories, which was interesting in the research. So one of the things we found is there were over 94 narratives. Now, keep in mind, we only asked people why not. We did not prompt them to go into a lot of detail about this, but yet we found a lot of detail in these narratives to go along with the score, which told us a lot about how people think and process this, what they've experienced. So I'm going to share a couple narratives, not all 15, I'm only going to share 6. But the thing is, we had from 94 narratives, we fed those all into an optimization algorithm to help us select the minimal number of narratives to express the breadth and depth or the breadth of the tech harms. So in the research, over 57 of the tech harms we have in our alphabet were recalled. Only 6 were not recalled. And when we ran these narratives through the algorithm, it identified 15 narratives. And we were able to look at the Pareto of the tech harm coverage that they contribute and be able to rank these as well. So I'll cover the top 6 and in different orders. So when you see these narratives, you'll see a picture. That's not the person. This was anonymous. It's really to humanize the person. You'll see where they fall on the scale of tech harm and tech harmony. And what we found is this is really the inverse of their score, because there was a lot of correlation between their score and their which of those personas they fall into based on their behaviors. You'll see 2 different color schemes going on. Pink is when we highlight things in pink in the narrative or in the list of harms by the quotation mark, or in the tech harm categories on the left, that indicates that they recalled this particular harm, but not necessarily experienced it. The red means they actually had direct or indirect experience with this tech harm. So you see in one example here, and I'll come back to this example. One thing I wanted to point out is there's potentially sensitive topics that have come up in these narratives, for instance, like violence or self-harm. So I apologize and wanted to make you aware of that. And hopefully that doesn't cause any triggering for anyone. So the first one is a simple one. I think it's something we all can relate to, which is this notion of unhelpful help. So again, you'll see because the experience was more around females, out of those 15 narratives, 13 are females and 2 are males. And all 6 of the top narratives are females of different ethnicities. This particular one is a budding pro. She's more neutral. And she's talking about how infuriating it is sitting on the phone when you're trying to get help and having to talk to a robot. And having that experience lead her to questioning her sanity. So in this, she's pointing out a couple things. She's talking about automation, which is a societal issue. She's talking about disservice, the inability to contact the help that you need. And that's more an experiential issue. And then she's talking about a form of unwellness, in particular psychological strain. If you're questioning your sanity, that's pretty severe that you're having that experience during this call. So this is just a simple example of the narratives and what people experience and what they think about. So here's one. Now this one is probably the most detailed narrative that we received. This is a budding pro. This person is 65 to 74. Again, the age did not factor into these archetypes. And this person is slightly more concerned about tech harm. You see that the rating is it's more harm than harmony. And this person recalled 21 different harms across 7 different categories, all 7 categories. There's a lot going on here, and I call it the rant. This is someone who is like, kind of like me, I guess, seeing so much stuff and have a lot to say about it. I don't rant, I don't think. I hope I don't rant. Maybe I do. But this person is definitely a ranter. None of these harms are actually experienced, but she's talking about the full gamut. She's talking about identities being stolen. She's talking about social media. She's talking about algorithmic control and, being popular and vanity, and it goes on and on. This is one of those things you sit with and you're like, wow, this is a lot. And she even goes on to bring up the potential self-harm and spamming, but what she talks about also is adjusting her behavior based on these things. For instance, if she needed to take her business to the internet and people would spam her, then she would just try another way to advertise, and old ways work best. So this is an example of a very rich, this is probably the longest narrative that we had. Now, I am not trying to bash social media, but I will tell you that in the top 6, just about every one of those narratives address social media in some way. It's top of mind for people. And this was, keep in mind, data was collected about 2 years ago in early 2020, going almost 2 years. So this one talks about some of the perils of phones and social media, trying to have, dinner with someone and they're on their phone their whole time, eating alone and how that makes them feel upset. They talk about depression and anxiety. So again, the budding pro, they're negative. They're having some experience with this. And I apologize, I did not highlight the red in the narrative, but almost all of these harms. She outlined 14 harms across 2 categories, the psychological strain and the social categories, and 10 of them were actually experienced. This is the one that I showed you initially in the overview. Again, it's talking about cancel culture that affects people in the social media circle, but also in real life, and how it can ruin reputations, or call reputational damage, relational ruin. And this person is all the way over to no harmony, all harm. So clearly this person has a firsthand or indirect experience of cancel culture, because they're explaining what it is and talking about how it affects people as well. Now, the last 2 shift a little bit to a different topic. And the first one is that tech is not inclusive. And this person is a budding pro as well, a Black female, and she's rating it as more harmony and less harm. And so she's talking about 12 different harms across 5 categories, with 8 of them being experienced. She's talking about bias and discrimination at work, not being treated the same, also being harassed on dating apps and social media sites, being trolled and attacked. Talks about the damage to your mental health, your physical health, and she's talking about the lack of diversity and inclusion, and just the vulnerability of people due to technology. And keep in mind, again, we did not prompt people. We didn't tell them what tech harm was. This is their explanation. And here's a similar one. This person is a specialist, and this is a narrative about feeling unsafe at work, and how technology was used. In this case, this is probably one of the most disturbing narratives that I came across, which is she's talking about a boss using IT to spy on employees, hack into their emails, lash out. So you're creating this quieting of people where they feel they cannot speak out in public, and having the IT person hack into a personal Facebook page, and just asking for IT people to follow a code of ethics as well. I just wanted to give you a sense of what people are thinking about. And again, these 6 harms cover about 75%. The 6 narratives cover about 75% of the tech harms that we, in the 63 tech harms. Now, these last 2, talking about tech harm in the workplace, hit very close for me. As a Black woman working in tech, I've had my own experiences with harm within tech companies. We all know about the firing of Timnit Gebru at Google, And all of these women share this common situation. They've either been fired, including myself, fired from Google, and or feeling like they were forced to resign from these companies. And I say this, and the same is true of other women too. And I say this because this affects all of us. If we're underrepresented in the first place, and then we're fired, or we are feeling as if we have to leave because of the environment, then that's even less representation. But the thing to know, typically, what we're doing in these spaces is often fixing tech harm. That's what's true for me. I was trying to fix image search. I was trying to help them salvage, at Google, salvage their uninformed efforts to deliver consumer hardware like laptops and tablets without understanding who the humans were. I attempted to try to remove a lot of the harm that's in Google image search as well in my time there. So when you remove people who are trying to fix things, who's left to do the fixing? So when you think about your colleagues, remember that and think about the experience and what it's like for them to be in these roles and in these positions where they're trying to fix, they're being discriminated against, they're being fired, they're being pushed out, they're having all types of challenges. And it's leading to the products not being better. And you can also put yourself in their shoes, because it does matter. If you can put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, how would you like to be underrepresented, being less than 3% when we think about women of color, being less than 3% of the computing workforce. We're underpromoted. I spent 7 years in this last go around with tech, moving laterally. I was always a rock star, never promoted. I've never been promoted in my career. However, we represent less than 3% of tech executives in these organizations. Underpaid. There are studies that say, we make 62% of what our white males earn in tech. Interesting story. A couple months before I was fired, I got over a 20% raise and a ton of stock. But yet a couple months later, I was fired. And so it's interesting how you go from rock star to dismissed, but that's okay. And 78% are mistreated. I shared those narratives about those stories and about what people are experiencing in this. And again, I did not make this up. These were selected by an algorithm. And to me, this is very relevant to what we're dealing with here today. And I'll close this and say tech harm is a people problem. I think when we call it tech harm, we shift the blame, I guess, to some degree on the technology, but it's not really the technology. People are making the technology. People are the ones that are doing some of the bad behaviors and the bad acting. So it's really a people problem, not a technology problem. And so I'll open it up for questions here before I close out. So if anyone has any questions for me right now, I invite you to ask.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation and also the personal story. There were some elements in there that I was not aware of. And so I appreciate that you shared this with us. So as a researcher, I probably fall into this category of I could do more in certain areas. So I want to ask one question that I really wanted to ask you. So I do a lot of augmented reality, virtual reality research. And it's only recently that I've really started to look into the ethical and privacy issues. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I lack frameworks that help me to think about these things. I also wonder, in the solutions we created at UIST, we had a week of papers and new technologies and whatnot. So I think for many of the projects, there could be some additional effort that we could put in to maybe mitigate tech harm. But at this conference, we often don't really study a lot of these factors that go into. So how would you, as an advisor, how would you balance the additional effort required to mitigate tech harm with, for example, when we really, in a community where we really care about building these new innovative technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will close out with a process that you can follow to do that. At the core of the process is really the alphabet of tech harm and these archetypes. Knowing these archetypes, knowing their blind spots, and trying to either, on the one hand, you can try to coach them, prompt them to move through this cycle with your product so that they can move from the sleeper into being more of the and being a generalist may not be, that's not the thing for all of us, but maybe a specialist or maybe, a budding pro, somewhere where they can successfully mitigate tech harm for themselves. So on the one hand is self-management, and how do we encourage that? On the other hand is, what can we do in our products? Just asking ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? Could this particular harm happen? Could that we have this alphabet of harms. You can go through each of those and think about which of those is your system vulnerable to, and how do you mitigate those harms? And you can do that before you even build a product. It can be a thought exercise, or you can actually do some user research. If you're not clear, to say, let's go through these harms. What do you, and not even give them that, and you ask them, what do you think is the worst that could happen here? What have I not thought about that could be possible to go wrong with my solution? And then you implement whatever fixes or mechanisms to try to mitigate that.
Yeah, I appreciate a systematic approach like that. And I was also thinking, what could I give my students in the courses that I'm teaching, and not in the last week of the course, but like early on?
Yeah.
How can they structure their thoughts so that they can think about the harms before they invent the thing? So I think we're getting a question from Jasmine. So yeah. I'm looking forward to that one. But also anybody else, please ask. We're monitoring Dr. Ivory and I. We're looking everywhere. Zoom chat.
Yeah, we are. We wanted to give you an opportunity to get your questions answered. And I know this is probably a topic that's different. And some people need to process for a while and think about as well. And I do promise you, I'm going back. This is not the end. I'm going back shortly to wrap up and talk about how this goes into HCI shortly.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. Okay, so the question is, a lot of the archetypes were divided along gender, but not race of divide. And why is that? Yes, because it wasn't just all gender. It was gender plus the devices used, privacy focus, and those ACE behaviors, the awareness, concern, and expertise. So it's a number of things that went into the cluster model to map people into the different categories. What I would say is race is not a factor, because the way we are aware, concerned, or have expertise with respect to tech harm, really the race doesn't matter, because we're all using similar devices, whether it's the hardware, the software, we're using similar tools. So that neutralizes it, so that race is not a factor. Socioeconomics is also not a factor. For instance, Android phones are available. There's inexpensive Android phones available. There's even more inexpensive iPhones available. So it factors out and is not as, I was honestly surprised about that. All right. So, Adam, having started adding a Black Mirror question to my studies, people who are creative, I found it hard. Do you think the best option is to propose mandatory courses that all tech students should take? Absolutely. We should have ethics, but it's more than ethics. Ethics is a set of principles. We also need practices that are actionable and easy to apply. And that's what I'm working on. In fact, I'm going to be delivering a seminar in a college in a couple weeks talking about this very topic because they recognize the need to have this integrated into the computer science curriculum. Bruce, very inspiring. Thank you. Yes, is also awareness of the problem at hand. Do you think the best option to propose men? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Was that the same question? No, it was different questions. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Yes. So I think I've answered the questions so far. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do now is I will switch back to wrapping up with, I just have a couple more slides. And if there's more time, I will come back.
All right.
But one thing I wanted to point out is when we think about HCI, human computer interaction, that's more like a transactional model, meaning, there's a request, there's a response between the human and computer. And either way, either party can initiate the request and the other party responds. And that's not really what's happening. And I hope one of the things you've seen in the narratives and the archetypes is that what's really happening is a relationship. So I propose that HCI should really be considered HCR, our human-computer relationship. We are managing a relationship between humans and computers. Whether we know it, whether we understand it or not, it's not transactional anymore. It's relational, what's going on. And so that's why frameworks like the Sustainable Disruption Framework that I'm developing that has the archetypes, has the alphabet of tech harm, and it has the process and tools to do this are important. Because tech harmony is about humans and computers being able to relate in beneficial ways for everyone involved. And so when we learn how to disrupt technologically without harming people, the planet, or profits, then that's when we get sustainable disruption. Right now, we're so focused on moving fast and breaking things, and we're breaking things too much. And we really need to step back and be a little more conscientious about what we're doing. One of the metaphors I like to use for this is the tech diamond. And the tech diamond really keeps in mind and keeps in front of us that there's a lot of stakeholders in any technology solution that we develop, whether it's an algorithm, whether it's a model, hardware, application, no matter what it is, there's always people there. And these people, from the supplier, like the Microsofts, the Facebooks, the Googles, and all of you who may have companies that are selling things to people, are suppliers. And then you have workers, the researchers, the software developers, the user interface designers, the servicers, all the way over to the buyers and the user. I spent a lot of time talking about the user. But there's other people to be concerned about in this diamond, even all the intermediaries, the people who are funding, the people who are regulating. And the reason I think of them as a facet is because in a diamond, you need all the facets to shine bright, to be brilliant. But if we have any of these facets that are not shining, that are dull, then the diamond cannot be brilliant. It cannot shine. It cannot sparkle. And so this is how we have to approach technology. It's about enriching and making everyone shine and sparkle. Now, I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic. I call it optimistic realism. I know it's hard to do this, but we have to do our best. And the other piece of this is diamonds come from where? They come from the earth. So the earth has to be a factor in this too, for this diamond to sparkle. And so that's the metaphor that I like to think about in terms of what we are trying to accomplish here. And ultimately, we need to be rebels. And that's when I talk about disrupting the status quo. Rebels is really an acronym for the process that I recommend that we go through to, mitigate tech harm. And it starts with refocus. We have to re-examine how we approach building technology. We refocus ourselves, recenter ourselves, recommit ourselves to making that diamond sparkle. And then we have to evaluate. I talked about the alphabet of tech harm, and this is getting into the question, Michael, about, what do we do? How do we do this? So you're going to evaluate. You're going to look at all these tech harm, the alphabet of tech harm, and you're going to think about beforehand, what could go wrong? Which ones could cause a problem for your users? And also understanding the archetypes that you're catering to, or making sure that you're addressing the needs and the caring that's required by all archetypes. Then you're going to block. You're going to mitigate these potential harms beforehand. You're going to design solutions. You're going to figure out how you're going to address them as part of think of it as a design constraint on your problem. And then you actually move into engineering this. And you're going to engineer this in a way where it's ethical. Now, I wanted an actionable definition of ethical. So I did a bunch of research and I came up with one where the E is about enriching. Enriching means it's going to make someone or something better. You're not just doing it for the sake of just having technology. You're going to enrich someone. It's going to be transparent. People need to know what's happening and be able to control it. You're going to make it holistic in the sense of it should be benefiting everyone in the process when we're doing these solutions. All stakeholders, that whole tech diamond, everyone should be benefiting from the solution, not just one facet of the diamond, but not another facet of the diamond, every facet of the diamond. Inclusive, especially to the marginalized majority in the development, usage, and monetization. Because the thing is, if people are participating in your solution, but they're not able to reap a financial benefit, that's problematic as well. Conscientious, meaning it's well thought out. It's well researched. Sorry. And the last two, accountable. If something happens, you respond to it immediately. You fix it. You don't deny it's your problem. You take ownership. And lovable. Who doesn't like delight? We want people to trust and revere our technology. We're going to be looking out for potential harms proactively, and we're going to resolve them or solve them when they arise. That's the framework. And honestly, freedom from tech harm should be a right, not a privilege. And I hope and invite you to join me in this, because we are the arbiters of the human-computer relationship, not just the interaction. The interaction is yesterday. Today, it's a relationship. And I invite you to think about what's one action. And I know there's questions. I certainly can. I know we started a little late, so I can certainly
get to the questions.
Get to the questions. I am almost done. Give me 2 more minutes, and I will jump into the questions. But I do have another prompt for you to think about. What's one action you will take immediately to elevate tech wellness with your tech solution, research, or effort? Again, you know the channels, where to post. And while you do that, let me talk about what I'm doing. Besides this, I am living and revisiting a dream. When I was in high school, graduating, on my way to Purdue University to study computer science, I had the fortune of being the valedictorian and keynote speaker. This is the first time I ever delivered a poem. It's the first poem that I recall writing. And I'm doing exactly what I was doing then, which is speaking. So that's great. But in this whole turmoil with this situation with Google, I found my high school memory book. And you see pictures of it. It's tattered, it's moldy, and it's mildew. But one page on the right had the future. And when I looked at this page, I had outlined, I would have a bachelor's, I would have a master's, I would have a PhD in computer science, I would be working in the industry. The roles were different. I was going to be a computer programmer and systems analyst. I don't even think I really knew what those were at the time. But the point was I was going to be in computer science. I did everything I said I would do, except for one thing. The one thing I said I would do was start my own company with my own programmers and software that was used universally. So guess what I'm doing? That's what Thrivify is about, revisiting that dream. And I am proud to say that Thrivify is a pending certified B or benefit corporation. We are a 1% for the planet member, and we're ethical by design because I am practicing what I am teaching here. And I'm so delighted that one aspect of what I get to do is to be an angel investor. Thrivify Sustainable Disruption Fund funds people in the marginalized majority. People of color, founders of color, represent less than 1% of venture capital funding. And this is one of the companies we funded, Self-Center. And I'm happy to report we were the first company to raise our hand to say, we will fund you, give you some angel funding. They're building this app called the Self-Center app to use a proprietary algorithm to do scheduling so that you have more time for the things that matter to you. So I'm excited to see their upcoming beta release soon. But more importantly, when Thrivify raises our hands to say, we'll fund you, it makes it possible for them to get other funding. But beyond the funding, I work with them to develop this app through sustainable disruption. And that's what's important to me, is if we can get founders and people early in the process to do things the right way the first time, then we're mitigating tech harm and elevating tech wellness. So that's exciting to me. Obviously, I've shared a lot of things that are going into my book, Why Tech Sucks, and how sustainable disruption can elevate tech wellness. This will be released in 2022. And I just want to thank you for listening. And I want to thank you in advance for helping to transform the status quo in tech. But also, if you can, and if you have, the authority and the ability for the marginalized majority and ultimately for us all. So thank you. And I'll turn it back over for questions if there's time.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much. I would like to ask you a few of the questions so we can focus on your answers. So they're very interesting questions. So part of the talk was aimed at us as tech inventors and what we can do. Richard Lin, who is actually a PhD student at UC Berkeley, so I wanted to mention that to you, and I got to know him during the conference. Really nice person. Is asking, so while tech people can and should do more to address harms, what are your thoughts about addressing larger structural factors that incentivize, even unintentionally, these harms? For example, in the policy, social, or financial space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So to me, we can only do so much. And that's really the gist of this question. We do our part. And then people have to do their part as well. So that's education. Like one of the, a lot of solutions came out from people. The number one solution people wanted was protection. They wanted tools to help protect them. But a close follow to that is guidance. Honestly, if people, if you think about that ACE map, we make people more aware, we make them more concerned, we give them the expertise, then we can make more conscious decisions. For instance, I talked a lot about social media through those narratives. And my position on this is, there's a lot of the political stuff and all of that comes into play, but ultimately people are choosing to use social media. And it's more, can we teach them to be conscious consumers of these technologies? And I think that that's really the answer there. And then as we are doing this, we can also put the pressure on our politicians. And we have to be honest, our politicians really, for the most part, don't really know much. And there's a lag, and it's known. That's why a lot of things are able to continue, because they're just not informed. Ultimately, I think some of us will have to get into politics. My husband asks me all the time, why don't you be a politician? I'm like, I don't want to be a politician because I want to actually get stuff done. But ultimately, some of us have to become politicians to get stuff done there as well.
Right. Another interesting consideration is, so a lot of the talk was designed to give us tools and ways to think about it during design and address it early. But if actually we as researchers realize that something we have built actually caused harm. So the question here is, what would you suggest researchers do if we retrospectively find out that our previous work has a potential for tech harms?
Yeah, that one's easy. It's, can you redesign it? And you would go through a redesign the same way you would approach an original design, except for now you got the evidence. Now you don't have to think about potential tech harms. You know the tech harms. And then you can figure out how to address it, how to redesign it, how to fix it. That's where the accountable comes in the ethical. Yeah, just be accountable. Right. And be committed to changing it.
I like that. Just redesign it, and that's great. And you can tell us about the redesign, and we as researchers can learn from that as well. So I think
absolutely, and publish it, because the thing is listen, I'll be the first to tell you, I have made mistakes. I have had, I've had successes. One of my biggest mistakes happened when I was at GE. And I'm going to share this just to be vulnerable, because this is what, we have to do with each other, just be vulnerable. So one of my biggest mistakes and biggest regrets happened when I was at GE. And I was building the new human machine interface for power plants. And I'd convinced a customer to let us give them a free upgrade to our new system, hardware and software. I did not know that the engineers were rushing this through. They weren't following the normal development process with all the checks and balances. Didn't know that. But I found this out after it was deployed. And let me tell you, this was a costly mistake. And this is something, talk about millions of dollars lost, because this is a mission critical system. And the software was preventing their hardware from functioning properly, and they couldn't make money. It can't get, probably the worst thing than that is if someone actually lost a life. But this is, for a business, this is almost like a business losing its life. And I had to be accountable for that. And I had to work with the engineers to fix it. And it took us 6 months. And I can't tell you how many times we had engineers living at their plant day by day, because it's a complicated system, fixing it. And it haunts me, but at the same time, this is why I am so passionate and concerned about tech harm. That was tech harm to the nth degree. And so I just have to own that, learn from that, and do better.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate the conversation with you. I want to ask a final important question that addresses some of the questions we've talked about. So a lot of us are teachers or somehow involved in instruction of students. One of our UIST participants pointed out how it's maybe sometimes harder to work with younger populations who seem to be more pro technology. So I want to get at this question: what would be a good start, in your opinion, to get some of these things into the curriculum? At Michigan, for example, we were wondering, should we create a new course? And then that maybe addresses some of these things. But we, as faculty, really strongly felt it needs to be interwoven. It needs to be raised in all the courses. It doesn't help to just have one course focus on that. If we build something like this, and many of us in the community are actually working on things, Evan Peck and some other really cool examples, what would be good resources? Like, what would be the first few resources you would point us to, being PhD students, being instructors? Should we wait for the book to come out? Do you have materials you could share with us already?
Yeah, I do have materials. I wouldn't say I would share them yet. definitely the book, these are all good points. The book is really designed to be an all-in-one resource. It's a memoir expose in the sense, but not just talking about the problem, but giving a solution. So all of these frameworks I've talked about, and there's more that I didn't get to today, will be in the book. In the meantime, feel free if you like, it could just be a lecture. Honestly, just awareness, raising awareness and helping people empathize with these other archetypes, because the young people learn best from influencers and peers. So having someone they respect, someone that's more like them to teach, and being able to see themselves in this, like having them identify what's your archetype, and going through the strengths of each archetype. Like being a tech fan is a strength. That's great for some, being an early adopter, that's a great thing to move technology forward. But then they also need to be aware of the blind spots. And I just think it's just, we don't know what we don't know. So, and keep in mind, it's not the case that all young people are the sleeper or the newbie personality, because once they've had some harm, they very quickly start migrating into some of those other archetypes. I think the archetypes are key. I think the narratives are key. And education, awareness, helping people care is definitely important. So it could look like maybe a course that is attended across the curriculum, it's like a shared course that or seminar that everyone participates in. It could be, and maybe it needs to be more interactive, more like a workshop where there's actual exercise. Think of it as it could be integrated into design thinking as well. So it could become a design thinking exercise. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. But most importantly, because of the nature of this, it has to be active learning. It's not something to just read about and try to digest. It's something to actually be on the court and do. So it could be running scenarios, simulations, role playing. There's a lot of different ways to address it.
All right. Thank you very much. I hope that the message came across clearly. What I really want to see is that we don't know how to cite a keynote when we write our papers, but I want to see some credit. If next year's UIST paper addresses some of these issues, give credit to this lecture and some of the other materials. Thank you very much, Dr. Ivory, for spending this really good time with us.
I'm more than welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. And I will try to answer questions on the system here.
Thank you. Jeff, back to you.
Yes, and thank you both very much. That was a great session. Really happy that came out really well. And now we will move into, once I figure out the right screen to share, we will move into the closing of the conference.